Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott, and thanks everybody. It's great to be back. I was gone for a couple of weeks, and I missed this place and this space. So I'm happy to be back. A couple of shameless self-promotional plugs. Less Men and Myth has been translated into German and is available through the Amazon Deutschland site. It'll be released in September, but you can do pre-ordering now if you want to bone up on your German language skills and read that. And the other thing, I just happened to get a posting on Facebook that Crystal City is going to be shown in San Antonio this month in June. So it's still out there and still circulating if you're interested in seeing it. What I wanted to talk about tonight is a little distinction that I've found clients have sometimes difficulty maneuvering, and that is this idea of self-nurturing and learning how to self-nurture. And I include self-care in that category. And sometimes to someone in early recovery, it can kind of feel a little bit self-indulgent and trying to figure out that line of, okay, when am I taking care of myself and when am I excessively kind of indulging myself in things when I really should be, I think, not suffering more, but certainly kind of working more, paying attention, and where's that line? And I think there's a couple ways to think about that. But first of all, what is self-nurturing? Self-nurturing, I think that the essence of that is really taking care of ourselves in a loving sort of way. I think most addicts, the core of our beliefs about ourselves are basically not very positive. I think a lot of our core beliefs are have to do with feeling unworthy, feeling unlovable, feeling not very attractive, feeling like we're bad people. And so there's a lot of negativity there. And of course, there's a lot of behaviors that have, done a lot of things to hurt people and harm people that loved us. And so there's a lot of behaviors that are bad. And we always try to tell our clients to separate, I'm a good person who's done bad things. So to try to make that distinction between shame and guilt. But that idea of self-nurturing is really critical, because that's a fairly new concept, I think, for people, that I am, first of all, worthy of taking care of myself. I don't have to, work myself till I drop in order to feel worthy of attention or being validated. I can have boundaries and set normal hours and set normal issues and boundaries in relationships and take care of myself. And so all these things are healthy ways of kind of starting to protect ourselves in terms of self-nurturing. It's necessary. It's necessary for our physical health. It's necessary for our emotional health. And it really fosters that mental health piece. It's loving and it's nurturing. So how do we tell the difference between self-indulgence and self-nurturing? And sometimes it can be the same, right? The same behavior can be either one. And I think that's where the intention behind the behavior gets in. So a dessert, a big sugary caloric dessert might be an example of something that can be self-care or self-nurturing, right? Or it can be self-indulgent. So when I think of things that are self-indulgent, and I'm using that in not a very positive connotation right now, that to me falls into the category of I'm feeling empty, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling not very good about myself, and I need a fix. I need a fix from something outside myself. Right. And that is such classic addictive thinking, right? We have to search for solutions of anything outside of us, whether it's people validating us or behaviors or drugs to get that fix. So that's an example of where the behavior might be self-indulgent. If I'm having that big sugary dessert because I just feel like crap and I want to just kind of blitz out on a sugar high, that's probably not a very good reason. If I'm having a good dessert because I've been really good at my diet and I've worked hard and I've not had dessert in a week and I deserve it, fine. I think that's a distinction there. It's also if we're looking for a sense of thrill, if we're trying to get a high, if we're, again, it goes back to intention. What is it about? If we're trying to numb ourselves, that same big sugary dessert might be a great way to just numb our feelings, right? I know that if I have a whole lot of sugar, I'm not going to feel very well, but I'm also not going to feel anything in terms of emotions after a while. So it may be a way to kind of self-destruct and go numb, as opposed to rewarding myself. So the same behavior can be twisted both ways. And I think it's really important to understand what is our intention behind it. The thing about self-indulgent behavior is like that is that the bill kind of arrives later, right? We pay the price down the road. We get into it now and we're deferring, we're kicking the can down the road in terms of the cost. It will catch up, right? Those bills, the credit card bill always does find us and come in. So I think that's another example. But it's so important to really look at these behaviors because I think a lot of us in early recovery defer that self-care, defer the nurturing. Well, when I have a certain period of time, then I'll give myself a little bit of a break and take more time, or I'll, spend more time with friends once I get through this or that, or I think we make choices in a way that limit the amount of self-nurturing and self-care that we may allow ourselves. And I think that's a mistake because we really need that, especially in early recovery. And a lot of that has to do with people and connections. We may not offer ourselves the opportunity to reach out and connect with people, to make those regular connections that are really so supportive and nourishing for our soul and for our connection. And frankly, just for our survival and recovery. I'm always telling my clients, if we make those calls when we're feeling good, it's a whole lot easier to make those calls when we're not, when we're feeling bad. So I think those ideas of self-nurturing are really critical to look at. And I think sometimes we tell ourselves it can be self-indulgent, sometimes they are, but it's really important to distinguish that. In early recovery, I didn't really have the capacity to distinguish that sometimes. I really needed feedback from other people, from my sponsor, from my friends, like say, this, I really want to do this. Is that crazy? and I would get feedback. And that could be everything from going to a movie to maybe taking a weekend trip away. Is that the best thing? Because my ability to decide and make good choices was really limited. I think and it's probably true for every addict, our prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the executive in the room, was kind of out to lunch. And it's basically disconnected in early recovery. The addiction does a good job of turning down our adult in the room in our brain. So I think it's really important to take care of that. So how do we transition to this attitude of self-nurturing? What can we do to kind of improve that? I think one thing is to go back to those core beliefs. What makes me worthy of nurturing, right? And I mentioned earlier, one of those core beliefs that a lot of addicts have is that I don't feel worthy. I don't feel like I'm worth this effort. Look at all the things I've done. Look at the trouble I've caused. Look at the pain, the misery I've caused myself and other people. But I think we have to really find the worth that we have to make it worthwhile to get into recovery, to make ourselves motivated enough to move forward. I think that's one thing. What does our resistance look like? What does the resistance to recovery look like for you? What beliefs are you telling yourself? What lies are you telling yourself about what the addiction is doing or what it's not doing or what you need it for or what your recovery might look like or what it might not look like? I think a lot of times we really fear what the other side of recovery looks like. If I really, really give up my drugs or my sex addiction or my porn, what's left? What's left of my life? And I'm kind of miserable in this state of active addiction. However, it's kind of a comfortable misery. I know what to expect. I get little bits of numb escape, or maybe a little bit of intensity, but it's not a very happy existence. And I think even that, though, is enough to kind of keep us locked down for a long time. And I think that old slogan, until the pain of that space gets so great that it's greater than the fear, frankly, of the unknown of recovery, then we get locked in that space. But I think that ability to move into self-worth and that transition is really important. And then what beliefs and behaviors about yourself foster self-nurturing? What makes you worthy of that self-care and that self-love? Because a lot of us don't have very much love and compassion for ourselves. So a couple of ways to do this. I've talked about self-care here before. I think of self-care in 4 dimensions: physical self-care, eating well, drinking water, physical exercise, getting lots of sleep. And there's all kinds of things to be said about each of those and ways to handle that to keep us on track. But I think that self-care is incredibly important. And then that self-care, by the way, also includes that emotional self-care, reaching out, staying connected, having that positive feedback. But then it goes beyond that. I think things like doing nice things for yourself, little kindnesses, niceties for yourself, right, are incredibly important. And again, it's a little expression of being worth it, of being worthwhile. And that may be, I've had, I was on actually the luxury of vacation the last couple of weeks, but I had a couple of days of a lot of things to get done, with a lot of work to get done and projects, and I was busy. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to be able to get to a meeting? And there's a new meeting I like close to my house. And I thought, I don't have time for that. And I thought, well, yeah, I do. Yeah, I always have time for a meeting. And it was the most wonderful luxury to like carve out this meeting space. And I saw people and I felt connected and I felt rejuvenated. And frankly, I'm sure I did much better work when I got home from that meeting. So those kind of things, that was it was a nicety for myself, right? It felt self-indulgent, but it was a really self-nurturing kind of thing to do for myself. So the other thing, my partner lately, it's been wonderful. He's been buying flowers, fresh flowers on occasion. We don't do that all the time, but what a nice thing to have fresh flowers in the house. It's beautiful. It's a reminder of life, and they're pretty to look at and they smell good, and just it's a nice thing, right? So I think just little things like that can mean such a difference for yourself. So healthy boundaries with others. I think we all have people in our lives. There's that expression, it's not very complimentary, I guess, but the emotional vampire syndrome, right, in our lives, where you have someone where you have an interaction with and you feel just drained, right? After you meet with them, they're very exhausting people to be around. And so I have to really put up boundaries with those folks and not spend a lot of time with them, or not engage with them at all if I'm kind of busy or having a weekday of my own. But healthy boundaries. Remember, boundaries are to protect us and to protect, and when we set what those are. And so I think boundaries in terms of my time, how much time I'm willing to give or not give, my space, my everything really that's just critical to have those boundaries. Becoming your own best advocate. And I think so sometimes we don't speak up for ourselves. I was one that, for me, my recovery included finding my voice. I didn't really have that before. I think I wasn't one to speak up. I was, and then I hate to say this, but I tended to be a little bit more on the passive aggressive side, probably in my disease. I wasn't direct, I wasn't assertive. And it's been a struggle in early recovery to do that. Now, fortunately, many years later, I think I'm better at it. But I think that speaking up for myself is really important. And frankly, nobody else is going to do it, right? And so we really have to do that. And that's also that idea of advocacy for ourselves is another way of nurturing ourselves. And finally, probably most important, and this may be the most one that we struggle over most, especially in early recovery, is to believe in ourselves. And I think so often, and I deal, as you guys know, with chemsex, so often with methamphetamine, especially, there's a lot of relapse. People just hit bottom over and over again, not picking up that white chip over and over again. There's shame and relapse, and this belief that just, I'm never going to get this. There's something just wrong with me, inherently wrong. There's that discouraging weight of hopelessness. And I think there's nothing more deadly than that. And I believe in all my heart, that's a false belief. That's just not true. And I think if we really can fight that, and on days when we don't have the strength to believe in ourselves, then we need to get our butts to a meeting or around people that can hold that space for us and tell us that they believe in us until we can believe in ourselves again. And I think that's where the beauty of staying connected is so important. But I think of all the things that are the factors of self-nurturing, that idea of believing in ourselves is the most critical. And I think with that, I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Great topic for the day. You and I both run into people, whether it's, in your therapy practice or at the center, or me teaching work groups, or just working with people who think that this will never work for them. They think they don't deserve it. There's something inherently wrong with them that they cannot recover, no matter how much effort they put in. Is that an excuse to stay in the addiction? Or can it be? Or what are the, we talked about some of the reasons, but sometimes I wonder, do you just want a reason to not get well? Do you just want a reason to stay in your addiction?
I think it's a really complex issue. I
Yeah,
think, as the big book says, there are some people, right, who are constitutionally incapable of it. And I think I've encountered those people. I know you have too. And that has to do with mental disorders and other kinds of personalities and stuff. But in my experience, those people are really, really rare. And I think there are probably many more people that believe they're among that group than actually are. And so I think in many cases, when people believe that, it's just not true. And I think part of it is based on just experience. If I've tried to get sober 20 times and it hasn't worked, why do I believe the 21st time is going to work, right? But I think we have to really look at what we've done in the past, how we've done it, again, the intention of what we've done. And part of it too, I think with certain drugs, especially like meth, is that we know the single biggest factor in recovery is retention. We keep coming back, and that's the factor. If we keep coming back, we keep showing up, and relapse is unfortunately part of the game, it does eventually get better. And so I think we have to do that. Part of it, by the way, too, is also there's mental illness, sometimes in terms of depression, anxiety, but all that can be worked with in recovery. That's not an excuse not to recover. So I do think sometimes people kind of hide behind that. It's easier to just kind of give up and say, sorry, it's just, I'm one of those people, can't do it. And again, I think that's choosing to kind of live in that comfortable misery of addiction, and ignore the hard work of recovery. Frankly, it's not easy, but there's great gifts.
And I do think that's why you mentioned that we often defer self-care, self-nurture. We make it conditional. Well, if this goes perfectly, maybe I'll go out to dinner with the guys or something. Something small, but it's a real shame-based thing. Like what I'm really believing under, I don't want, I can't go to dinner with the guys after the meeting because I don't deserve it, is they don't want me at dinner. That's what I'm really thinking. I can't go to dinners because I'll ruin it for them. And when I came into recovery, that was a big thing for me. Is like, people had to ask like 5 times before I would say yes.
Right.
But I think it's incumbent upon those of us who've been in recovery for a while to keep asking, to say, we'd really like you to come to dinner with us or have coffee or whatever. You seem like a nice person, and we can help you with your recovery, and we'd like to. And
I think to remember how it feels to be in that space.
Right. The question, what makes me worthy? This is such a hard, you and I both know this is such a hard question for addicts to answer. Really for probably most people to answer, but especially addicts, because we are so shame driven. If you say, list 100 things that are wrong with you or that you hate about yourself, we can complete that list in about 47 seconds. But tell me 3 good things about yourself. The guys go, 10 minutes later, you're trying to drag something out of them.
Right.
What are some active things that people can do to reality check, number one, and to begin the process of changing their attitudes about themselves and sort of killing this shame in a way? Because our shame is a lie. It's just a lie. Every shame message we have is a lie.
I totally agree with that. I think the best way I have found to kind of break the lock of that belief system, and when you're in that state of feeling like there's really no redeeming qualities about me at all, it's really hard to kind of invent something or see it, right? We almost need a different perspective. And so therapeutically, there's different techniques for that, but 2 come to mind. One, if you're lucky enough to be in a group setting, like we have the residential treatment center or in an outpatient group or somewhere, or even in a 12-step meeting, where there's people that know you, sometimes you can elicit that, or you can somehow get that feedback from people, because oftentimes, most times, other people can see it in us much more clearly than we can see it in ourselves, because we have that skewed, it's almost like blinders, right? That were put on early on, and we have a hard time seeing the truth, right? Where it's lies about ourselves, we can't see it. So I think we almost need other people to see it for us and point it out. The one time or one kind of intervention I've seen where a person can start to do it themselves, and it's worked in my own life, is if I can start to dialogue with a younger, more vulnerable me, right? With my younger child, I can start to have compassion for that wounded little boy that was somehow innocent and had all this stuff kind of put upon him. I can start to see where that little boy had all kinds of worthy characters that before they got kind of buried under life. And then what I realized, hopefully out of that exercise, is that those good qualities are still there, right? It's just I've lost touch with them. But somehow that's a way to reconnect with them, is that we can see it in our, I guess you can call it inner child, wounded child, lost child, whatever you want to call it, that inner part of ourselves, that somehow most of us can start to have some compassion for, in a way that we can't have compassion for ourselves as adults, because of what you're talking about, the shame, the things we've done, the harms we've caused. At least in early recovery, it's really hard to make that mental jump and say, I'm really kind of a good person who did bad things. We ask our clients often to do those affirmations, and it's an affirmation, which is aspirational, right? We want to believe that, but I think it's really hard to believe that in early recovery. But we can start to believe that about, that little boy in me who was 6 or 8 or 10 years old, or if 3 of my friends or 6 of my friends point out stuff to me, maybe I need to listen to that, right? And so there's other ways of kind of hearing it, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that when I've, talked to my inner child or done, the parts exercises where I'm talking to the parts of myself, I find that sometimes I can identify the roots of the shame. That inner child knows where the hurt came from, even though the adult me has forgotten it. And as the adult me, I can sort of reparent the inner child and say, that wasn't your fault.
Absolutely.
You were just there and you got blamed for something that had nothing to do with you. And you've carried this message around, for your entire life about this kind of person. This is a story from Pat Carnes, but, when he finally got into recovery and went into therapy, he was telling his therapist about his childhood. And he said, I was a troublemaking little kid. I was always in trouble. And then was asked for some examples, and he said, well, when I was 3, he grew up in Minnesota. This is in the book, so I'm not betraying any confidences, but he's told me this stuff himself. When I was 3, it was winter in Minnesota, and the lake was frozen over, and I went for a walk on the lake and fell through the ice, and I almost died. And then when I was 4, I got in my dad's truck and somehow put it in gear, and it rolled down the driveway and smashed up a couple of cars. And then when I was, there's a whole bunch of stories, and his therapist looked at him and said, Pat, you weren't a mischievous child. You were a little kid that nobody was watching. Your parents were no one was watching you and taking care of you. I mean, you're not a troublemaker. No one was watching you. And that was like an aha moment for him to realize, oh, okay. But he says, and I can vouch for my own shame messages, I still have my shame messages. They're still in there. The voices still tell me all that are wrong with me. But through a lot of work, I've learned they're not true. And that's part of my self-care and self-nurture, is reminding myself that those things are not true.
Right. And I think that's such an important point, Scott, because I think often we can't totally purge those messages. They're kind of part of our wiring after some point, but we can never forget that they're not true, right? We can remind ourselves when they pop up again that those aren't true. We can remind ourselves, and we can start to change those beliefs. But I think, at least in my weak moments, or when I'm tired or emotionally worn out or something, sometimes they come up again, and I kind of have to remind myself those are not those are not facts, right? The other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes I've seen clients who are resistant to letting go of those kind of false beliefs about themselves and reluctant to see the truth about kind of who they are.
If I'm not defective, who am I?
Right. And that's fear-based. Or there's what a therapist would call secondary gain, meaning that there's some kind of payoff in hanging on to that belief that I'm really a bad person, right? And that may be, and it can be as simple as, well, that gives me an excuse to drink and drug and act out because I'm such a loser. I need to medicate that. There's other gains too. Maybe it's getting attention from people. Maybe it's feeling like a victim and there can be all kinds of ways. So when people are really resistant to letting go of that and moving on to healthier beliefs about themselves, I always kind of look at, okay, what's the resistance here, and what are you holding on to, and why? And that can also be very useful to kind of look at, okay, well, what am I getting out of this? Like, why, after 60 years, why am I still hanging on to that? And oftentimes there's some kind of payoff that we need to examine.
Yeah, somebody popped into the chat feature that they've heard about a sponsor telling their sponsee to go to 10 people close to them and ask for 3 things that they like about them, 3 positive things. And I know that happens in therapy settings. I've done it when I was in therapy.
We do things like that in the LA program, like every day almost, some kind of assignment like that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump into the Q&A.
Yeah, sure.
Is porn addiction a progressive disease, even when you're in recovery? So maybe you can explain, because all addictions are progressive diseases. So maybe explain what that means, and then address porn addiction and specifically, and what happens even when we're in recovery.
Right. So as Scott said, every addiction is progressive, meaning there's a universal feature called tolerance, because addictions are dopamine based, one of those neurotransmitters. Basically, dopamine requires novelty and increasing stimulation and intensity. And so if we look at the same kind of porn in this example, after a while, it's not going to do it for us anymore, and we have to do something new and different. And so very typically, to go to the progressive point here, people in their pornographic genres escalate. They get into things that are rougher or more taboo or kinkier or more exotic and sometimes illegal, and just kind of in an effort to kind of get the dopamine kick going on. And so that in that regard, porn, like every other addiction, is highly progressive, and it escalates because of that phenomenon of tolerance. Now in recovery, like other addictions, we also say that they kind of continue to progress, and that's often a mystery to people. And I think those of us that have been around a while have seen this in real life, where I remember, it shook me up when I first got sober. There was a guy who was like the granddaddy of everybody in the rooms. He had like 20 some years of sobriety. He'd gone from homelessness to being a school principal in a private school. And he was like, he had his life made, and he relapsed like big time. And in probably 2 weeks, he was back on the streets and homeless, and his drinking went right back. He was a drinker at that point. His drinking went right back to where it was. And it was a real life example of one of those things I'd always heard, where your drinking picks up and even gets worse because it's progressing even while you're sober. And I think that happens in all addictions, where after a hiatus of even many years, it will pick up and keep going at a high speed. And so I think, yes, it does progress. And remember also with pornography and sex addiction, because of the impact on arousal templates, those don't get undone. Those arousal fantasies that are kind of skewed and implanted by porn and sexual acting out under the influence of drugs or porn or sex addiction, those stay in your head. And so those are always there. And so those are always kind of a temptation as well. So yeah, there's a lot of aspects about that in terms of progressive.
Thank you. We are 1 year from our second D-Day with my porn addict, sex addict husband of 18 years. This is his first time in treatment for addiction. We couldn't afford an inpatient, but he sees a CSAT once a week and attends a couple of online work groups and SAA. He never shares and has made no connections. I know this is something he struggles with, connecting with people, but why is he not embracing recovery? He says he's just not motivated to do any actual work. He has stayed sober for a year, but he's working from home and under close supervision. I assume from the questionnaire, I worry that he'll never make connections and embrace recovery. Should I be concerned, or can he stay sober this way? Very good question.
Great question. And yes, I would be concerned, to be blunt. Yeah, this is not really recovery. And I don't think this is recovery that can be sustained doing what he's doing. You know, we say, and this is, by the way, validated in all the literature lately, that the heart, the very essence of recovery is connection and making those connections. And it's people-based. We need other people. They need us. And it's all that kind of mutual support that is the essential kind of X factor in recovery. So his willingness to kind of make those connections and embrace that and step into it is a concern. So I think there does need to be real life meetings. I understand the financial piece. Not everybody can afford treatment, unfortunately. So if seeing a CSAT is a good thing, but meetings are free. He does need to make an effort to get to meetings and connect with people. I think without that, it's a problem. We had been speaking quite at length earlier about resistance to this and kind of stepping into this and what's going on. And I think I would encourage him to work with his CSAT on what those elements of resistance are. What's going on there? Is it fear about what might be, what he might uncover? Is it old trauma? Is it just not wanting to move forward? Or is he just stuck? And, depending on what the answers to those questions are, the solutions might be different. But this is not a place that's viable for any length of time. Frankly, that he's managed to do this for a year is surprising to me, because this is not sustainable, in my opinion, for very long. And now I've seen guys, Scott and I have talked about this before. We've seen people kind of make half-hearted attempts at recovery, and sometimes they can stay dry, if you will. I wouldn't call it sober, but they're often angry or just not exactly models of recovery, and usually not emotionally very healthy.
One bad moment away. Relapse is just one bad moment away.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Yeah. So I think the key here, what he does have going for him, is the CSAT, and I would really encourage him to work with his CSAT to see what's going on. And frankly, I don't know what his CSAT's been doing, but hopefully his CSAT has been pushing him to get more engaged, because this is a relapse just waiting to happen, frankly. And meanwhile, basically for you, the person writing the question, I hope you're getting your support as well, because this is a stressful situation for you too. And you need to figure out where your boundaries are and what you need to do to take care of yourself in the midst of all this situation.
Yeah, and a huge part of addiction in the first place is we disconnect. Usually it's shame driven. We're afraid of other people. We're ashamed of ourselves, and we're afraid, if you know the real us and see the real us, that you will run screaming from the room. That's one of the shame tapes that plays in pretty much every addict's head, one way or another, some version of that. If you know me, you will abandon me. So reaching out to people in any setting is hard for us. Even when we're in a relationship, we're usually not fully in the relationship. We're hiding things. We're showing even our partners, the people we love the most, only the facade. We're only showing you what we want you to see, because we are convinced that if you see behind that facade, you'll dump us, you'll leave us, you'll laugh at us, you'll tell everybody, whatever. We're terrified. You would never do that, but we're terrified that you would. And we're terrified, we're paying a therapist, so we're less terrified with a therapist. But I can tell you, in a work group or an SAA meeting, we're still terrified. And it's very hard for us to get past that barrier and trust somebody. So some of that may be going on, but some of it may be other forms of resistance, just, anything to not have to change in early recovery. But yeah, David's totally right. I mean, the solution to addiction is connection. It's not white knuckling. It's connecting with people who help us feel connected and loved and seen and embraced anyway. And then we don't have this need to escape. So until he breaks through this and makes the connection and embraces recovery, yeah, he's always going to be, I think, on the brink of relapse or slip. So yeah, David's right. Yeah, you're right to be worried. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he's got a babysitter right now, so he's staying sober, but one day he's not going to have a babysitter, and then what happens?
And and it may be fear. I mean, I've seen clients too that they're afraid to move forward, they're afraid to go backward, right? He's frozen, he's stuck there, and that may be fear. But again, that's something that probably his CSAT can help him with and move forward. He needs to move forward, whatever that barrier is. He needs to get through it.
Yeah, I'm glad he's got CSAT. I've been in an active recovery process for some time, and I've gained good success in abstaining from sexual acting out. I'm still having huge difficulties with dishonesty, not so much about big things like relapse, but with little things that have very little consequence, but are huge to my wife and so frustrating to me. What are some good tools and resources I can use to change this ingrained behavior? Excellent question.
Yeah, Scott, I'm going to ask you for your input on this one too. We've talked here before about how addicts generally just kind of lie kind of automatically over stupid stuff that are not even necessary, kind of very much to the heart of this question, not even the big stuff anymore, but little stupid stuff that do indeed make partners crazy, because that's the whole gist of the betrayal right there. And it doesn't matter if it's a big thing or a little thing, it's still a lie. And so what we always talk about is, because we recognize that this phenomenon does happen, at least more in early recovery, it does, I think, get better to, if you tell a lie, to come clean and come clean sooner and faster, as fast as possible. So that's a really important strategy when it happens, when it tumbles out of your mouth. I think one tool that I could recommend is just to really be really conscious about what you say, be mindful. The whole idea of mindfulness, which is just this kind of acute attention to what you're feeling and doing and saying, I think could be really useful. Maybe slow down your speech and just think about what you say before you say it, and just be really intentional with your speech. It may be a little bit cumbersome initially, but I think it'll help you avoid some of these lies. And I assume, based on a lot of other addicts, they're probably not intentional. They just kind of happen. That's what seems to happen early on. Doesn't reduce the impact on your partner at all, I know. But I think just being really intentional in what you do is one way to start. Scott, what else? What do you have in mind? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember if this questioner is in a relationship or not. I should know, because I think I do know, but I can't remember. But Dr. Rom writes a lot about honesty in Out of the Doghouse, which is a book for men who betrayed their partners and want to save the relationship. And he tells a true story in there about a guy who's gotten very good about telling the truth about his addiction, and he's staying sober. But his wife looks at him one day and says, "Did you take the trash out?" He says, "Yes." And then 30 seconds later, she looked out the window and he's rolling the trash out to the curb. And he walked in and she said, "That's it, we're done." Because it was just, if you're just one more lie, she said, "I can't believe anything that you say, because you lied about taking trash out, after lying about all this." So, but it's such an ingrained habit for us to lie. When I first got into recovery, I thought I was honest Joe. I was honest. I never lied. And then I started paying attention to the things that came out of my mouth. And I realized I lied constantly. And most of the lies had no purpose. They didn't make me look good. They didn't make me look bad. They were just lies. I had gotten so used to lying about covering up the addiction that everything was a lie. I don't like mayonnaise on my burgers. I would tell you I was allergic to mayonnaise. I'm not allergic to mayonnaise. I just don't like it. Why would I lie about that? I don't want mayonnaise on my burger. I don't like it. That's a perfectly good statement to get my burger without mayonnaise. But, it's just random stuff. So, I really started paying attention, and it took me about a year to really break myself of this constant lying. And I would, even in a 12-step meeting or therapy, something would come out of my mouth, and like 30 seconds later, I'd say, I'm sorry, you know what I said 30 seconds ago? It was a total lie, and I don't know why I said it. And the room would laugh because they got it. We were all battling this. One of the things that helped me, David talks about affirmations a lot. I did steps 4 and 5 and identified dishonesty as one of my character traits. But affirmations for me, I did a lot of affirmations around honesty. And, as David says, and we have in all our books, when we do affirmations, we state them as if they are already true. Even if they're aspirational, which they are, we state them as if they are true. So I am an honest person. I correct any lies immediately. I had 3 or 4 of those, and I would say them morning, noon, and night, looking at myself in a mirror for 30 days at a pop. And it worked because I was suddenly very aware that I am trying to be a more honest person. So I would suggest that, and do it morning, noon, and night for 30 days. I think it'll make a big difference. So anything to add to that, David?
No, I really like that. It's making it conscious and intentional, and it's a habit.
Yeah. And even in our prayers, asking our higher power to take away, our propensity to lie. I don't know if the higher power that I have says, okay, I'll pluck the lies out of your mouth, or if it's just me making myself aware and kind of saying out loud, I don't want to tell you more lies, basically. But I think awareness is the key, and you're aware that you're doing it. So that's half the battle.
Yeah.
I thought this meeting was for the betrayed partner. This is a meeting for addicts, betrayed partners, and couples. We've been very focused on addicts today. But if you're a betrayed partner and you have a question, by all means, ask it. You are welcome here.
Totally welcome.
Carlos. Oh, sorry. I'm going to mix up the questions so we don't know who came from what, but I just said somebody's name. It shouldn't have. So this is from someone else. I'm going to mix up the questions.
Mix and match.
Yeah. So you won't know whose name I just said. Why is porn and sex addiction so hard to beat? Great question. Why can't I quit?
Yeah, it is a really great question, because sex and porn addiction really go to the heart of addiction itself, which is a hijacking of this system that's already in our brain that has helped us survive as a species for thousands of years, this dopamine system that gives us reward or feel good feelings for things we do that help us survive as a species, like collaborating, cooperating, eating good food, listening to good music, and most of all, making love and having an orgasm. We get so-called natural rewards, dopamine bursts for all that stuff. And it keeps us coming back for more, and it's kept us going forward as a species. Addiction comes along, takes that beautiful system and hijacks it so that the dopamine levels for all those normal behaviors are just powerless. They're like nothing compared to the intensity of methamphetamine or cocaine or sex or porn or even heroin or alcohol or any of the other addictive behavior. They're so much more powerful in terms of the kick and the dopamine release they give that everything else pales. And so it's taking this inherent process that's built into our brains, right? It's not a foreign thing that comes in. It's like taking a part of our brain and it hijacks it for itself. And so it's part of us, and but it's all skewed and hijacked. And so that's really what makes it so hard. We're fighting ourselves in a way. We're fighting a part of our own brain because it's working against us. And it's the system that's gotten hijacked. And because of the dopamine and the nature of it, the reward, it's so-called reward, meaning it feels good. It's very attractive for the moment, at least. It's very appealing. And probably most of all, from an addiction point of view, it allows us to check out. It allows us to escape from our fantasies, from our feelings. It just puts us into a different realm where we can handle ourselves in a way that's not very productive, but we can cope with stuff by not coping. We can we manage things by avoiding things, right? It's all about checking out and moving into this fantasy space. And that becomes, over the course of time, our primary way of dealing with life. And that's why, to me, it's so hard to give up, because it's this inherent brain process that is working with our own brain chemistry that helps us feel good and is supposed to help us feel good. But the whole thing has been perverted by these chemicals and behaviors. So we're working against our own brain chemistry at some point. But also, part of it is very effective, at least initially, at taking us away from life's problems. Okay, I don't want to deal with feeling bad about myself or feeling shame or feeling unworthy or any of that stuff. I just drop into these addictive behaviors and it's all gone for a while. And that's very appealing for somebody who's in a lot of emotional pain. And so I think it's a double whammy. We have to fight our own brain chemistry and deal with, by the way, the coming back down to earth, where things aren't quite as bright and shiny, at least initially, as they are when we're high or using porn or cocaine or meth. It turns out they're much better when we're not doing that stuff, but it's a very different experience than that intensity experience. But it also means that in recovery, we have to start dealing with life on life's terms, right? So we have to not avoid anymore, but we have to sort of feel feelings. We have to feel sadness and grief and happiness, by the way, and excitement and all the full range of feelings. But that's something that we don't do very well. And it's something that often we don't have skills. And we talk about sex and porn addiction, by the way, there's even an added element, because it involves sex and intimacy and connection, which is such a primary aspect of human life. And that intimacy and connection piece, Dr. Rob says, and I'm totally on board with this, that every sex addict no doubt has an intimacy disorder, meaning sex addicts and porn addicts basically don't know how to be intimate in a healthy way. In fact, we're rolling out a work group on intimacy skills coming down the road soon. So, but these are all things that have to be done in recovery, and it's hard work. It's hard work. It's so much easier, I think, sometimes to just say, okay, let's just drop back into fantasy and not deal with any of this stuff today, right? I think a lot of addicts make that choice every day, but it's hard. It's hard work, and every day I admire everybody who's in recovery, but I really admire people who are just starting out. I was telling our clients today, or maybe yesterday, that how much admiration I have for somebody who comes to treatment, because you really don't know what you're getting. You're really surrendering your life to this group of people. You have no idea what to expect. It's a total act of faith, and it takes a lot of courage. But I know people don't make that decision unless they're in a lot of pain, right? Or else their families are in a lot of pain and they come, and it's totally worth it. But it's a hard choice, and recovery is not easy, but boy, the payoff is amazing. Scott, do you have any thoughts on what makes it so hard? I was kind of.
Well, part of it is and it's what we've been talking about all day, is this lack of intimacy, this lack of connection that addicts have, that derives from early shame, early trauma, and kind of carries through life. Healthy coping skills typically involve other people. Go talk to someone. That's always our best coping skill. Call someone, sit down with your partner and say, I'm struggling with this. I need you to know, and I want you to know that I'm going to work on it. Maybe you can help me somehow, and even if they're mad, they'll probably, if they love you, they're going to help you. But that's not how we operate. We go eat a cake, the whole cake, or we go look at porn, or, we use these we manipulate our neurochemistry with intensity of some sort so that we can escape what it is we're not feeling, whether it's stress or boredom or loneliness or shame or anxiety or depression, whatever it is we don't want to feel. The crux of addiction is we don't feel it, so we escape it. And we get really good at it. And the intensity that David talks about with sex and porn addiction and drugs like meth and cocaine, it is incredibly effective because it gives us a huge blast of dopamine, much more even than the natural blast of an orgasm.
Like 1,300 times more.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So David, maybe you can actually talk about the damage we do to our brain in terms of sort of the brain recognizes that there's way too much dopamine going on here, and it turns the volume down. And then we end up sort of feeding the beast. We're depressed, so we act out, and then we're more depressed because we act out. We're more depressed because we have more shame, and we're more depressed because we've done more damage to our brain. It's a self-licking lollipop. We just kind of spin. Maybe can you talk a little bit about what happens in the brain real quick?
Yeah. So with these intensity addictions like sex, porn, and chemsex, or so cocaine and methamphetamine, those four, behaviors and drugs are the high intensity addictive drugs and behaviors, right? Those are the gold standard in terms of just dopamine dumps in the brain. But and it's so much more than the brain is able to really handle, that the brain has just a couple moves to take care of itself, to try to turn down the volume. And what it does, and because these are all dopamine, and all those behaviors, whether it's meth, cocaine, porn, or sex addiction, causes tremendous release of dopamine in the brain, which causes this great flood of euphoria temporarily, but it also does damage to the brain, to the circuits. It's overwhelming. The brain's not built to handle it. So as a survival technique, the brain will actually do what's called dopamine downregulation, meaning the only trick it has is to start to kill off its own dopamine receptors, so that it literally can't circulate as much dopamine. It doesn't have the physical capacity. That's the only way it can start to protect itself. It's like destroying its own circuitry, if you will. And as that happens, you start to get less effect of the cocaine or meth or porn or sex. And so people start to use more. And that this sort of cycle starts to repeat itself, where it just gets to the point where people overdose or get into real trouble. But you hit a point where your just brain can't handle anymore. That also has an impact on recovery. So you get into recovery, suddenly the volume is turned off, the intensity stops, you're not acting out, you're not using porn, you're not using cocaine or meth. And so it's quiet, right? But the brain is already adapted to all that intensity and noise. And so now we're not getting enough dopamine. And so there's a period of 3 or 4
enough
months.
Dopamine to just be okay sitting still. We don't have that in our bodies anymore.
No, and so all the stuff that would even normally give us dopamine, like good food or our partners or our dogs or our favorite music or whatever, colors, everything looks kind of dull and doesn't taste as good. And there's a name called anhedonia. And it's for 3 or 4 months until the brain has a chance to regenerate dopamine receptors so it can start to adequately circulate dopamine. So these addictive disorders, and not just the substances, but the behavioral ones, have a physiological impact on your brain. You're causing some brain disorder and the brain, fortunately, the good news is it can come back. It can come back, but it's not a fast process. It takes months. In fact, unfortunately, the meth users, we know from studies, take up to 24 months for really long-term chronic meth users. So this is a problem. And by the way, you're not just depressed during that period of low dopamine receptors, you're also highly impulsive, meaning you have no impulse control. There's no brakes. Your brain is telling you, go, 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 look at porn, act out, see your affair partner, use meth, use cocaine. And there's nobody saying, no, don't do that, right? That you have all these impulses and no brakes. And you also feel very hopeless. Like we were talking earlier, nobody ever gets really sober from this. I'm not going to do it. Nobody ever really does. So it's a bad situation. That's why we need extra support in early recovery.
Yeah. We've got a couple of questions here that are related, so I'm gonna squish them together. So part of this is from someone who told a lie by omission, which is kept something secret, felt bad about it on his own, and now his wife has called him out on it, and the fact that he's hurt her again. Why is it so hard to get it right? And then the other part is from someone else. Can you please tell me, in a 3-circle plan, where does lying belong? So thoughts, David?
Right. So this comes up quite a bit. I think a lot of times partners would like to see lying in the inner circle, meaning that defines a relapse.
Yeah.
And so we, on the staff at least, the clinical staff, are kind of resistant to that, because for the reason that we've spoken about tonight, lying kind of a fact of life in early recovery, and it's going to happen. And we don't really want to see somebody have to restart their day count or redefine their sobriety based on a lie, that they don't like mayonnaise on their hamburgers or something like that, to use the example Scott used. So I prefer to see lying in the yellow circle, right? That the slippery slope circle, and not necessarily relating to a relapse. Now, that means, yeah, if you tell a lie, that means you correct it quickly, with your sponsor, with your partner, with whoever you need to, with your therapist. It's not just left undone. It's not permission to lie, but it's what you do with it. But in my mind, it doesn't really belong in that relapse center circle.
Yeah. Yeah. The red circle, the bottom line behaviors are about actual sexual behaviors. And stuff like lying is in the yellow circle, slippery. We used to call them inner, middle, and outer. I call them red, yellow, green now. It's more visual for people. And then, excuse me, one of the boundaries that we often suggest to couples is, if the addict lies, he or she has 24 hours to come clean about it. And if the addict comes clean within 24 hours, and that lying includes sequence, absolutely. If the addict comes clean within 24 hours, the betrayed partner promises not to get mad about the delay. They can still get mad about what you did and what you covered up, but they're not going to get mad about the delay. It's a recognition that you are working on becoming more honest. But the betrayed partner still gets the truth. Now, if you don't come clean within that 24 hours, the betrayed partner has two things to be mad at you about. But it can be a really effective boundary, both for addicts and betrayed partners, because betrayed partners can see some progress. I'm sorry, last night you asked me this, I told you this, that's not true. What I should have said was the truth, which is this. That's progress in most relationships. When you're dealing with sex and porn addict, that's progress. So it acknowledges, yeah, you got something to work on, but at least you're trying. So I don't know, any more thoughts about that or anything else, David?
I think that's pretty much it. I think I agree with everything you said, and just that yellow circle is the place.
Yeah, yellow circle is the line. A lot of betrayed partners want it in the red circle, and sometimes addicts will agree to that. It's not my recommendation, clearly not David's either. We have more questions. I'm going to save them for next week since we are past our time. But I promise that next week, the first question we will answer is the first question that we did not get to today. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, David, as always, for your expertise and your time. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Anything you want to say to take us out, David?
Yes, just don't forget that self-nurturing behavior. It starts with a single act and keeps going from there.
Thank you. All right, everybody, we'll see you.
Good night, Scott.